Hello everyone, my name is Xiaodong Yue. I'm a professor at Capital Normal University. Welcome to my course of skills for writing and publishing academic papers in English. Today's topic is how to avoid academic plagiarism. Before we start our talk, let's see the vocabulary or the words for this talk. I'll do you a favor. Please read after me to familiarize your ear for the terms, for the words, for the vocabulary I'll mention in this talk. Are you ready? Read after me. Scholarly, plagiarism, fraud, quote, self-plagiarism, misappropriation, intellectual property, manuscript, authorship, consensus, richest fund, manipulation, falsification, fabrication, data sets, replication, retracted, submission, rephrased, condensed, detect, database index, documentation, in-text citations, paraphrase, direct plagiarism, mosaic plagiarism, insufficient acknowledgement, validation, references, plagiarism checker, original source. Now, first of all, I have these questions for you. Do you know what academic plagiarism is? Do you know what academic misconduct is? Do you know what academic falsification is? Do you know cases of academic plagiarism? And most important of all, do you know how to avoid academic plagiarism? Now, first of all, let's define what academic plagiarism is. Before I tell what plagiarism is, let me tell you a story. Many years ago, a doctoral student took a course and was required to write a review paper. He stayed in the library for days to complete the paper, and when he got his paper back, he was delighted to see an A- mark on his paper. But his professor asked him to go to her office for a talk because she doubted if the paper was truly written by the student as the English was so good. And the student told the professor that he majored in English at college. Still, the professor wanted the student to bring along the articles that he cited for the paper. The student agreed and brought the articles to her a day later. A week later, the professor asked the student to see her again and pointed out that some quotations would not put quotation marks. The student explained that he did include the source, but the professor told the student that he had to either quote word by word using quotation marks or paraphrase the entire sentence, even though he enclosed the reference. The student realized his mistake and proposed to rewrite the part. The professor agreed, and the paper was resubmitted 2 days later. Eventually, the professor gave the student a B+, and the student learned the lesson forever. And that student is me. And this is a photo. This is my professor. I thank the professor for giving me the lesson about the topic we addressed today. Now, let's first give a definition of what academic plagiarism is. According to the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, plagiarize means to steal and pass off ideas or works of another as one's own, and to use another's product without crediting the source, and to commit literary theft, and to present as new an original idea or product derived from an existing source. In short, plagiarism is active fraud that involves both stealing someone else's products and lying about it afterwards. So this is plagiarism is all about, and we should avoid it at all costs. To give you an example, here it says, University of South Carolina president resigns after plagiarism incident in commencement speech. And here is another one. That's the president make a plagiarized speech, and this time it's a student from Duke University. He made a speech that was previously made, or the similar speech was made by a graduate at Harvard commencement. And this is the comparison between the Duke University student speech and the Harvard University student speech. You can see the overlap between the two speeches. And you see this is what is called plagiarizing. What the student at a Duke University should do is to say, as the student at Harvard University said in her commencement speech, blah, 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 blah. And there's no problem. But she didn't say this, and she got herself into trouble. And that was only a commencement speech for a student. What if for the president of university? He resigned. He lost a job because he copied a speech from another person. That's really bad and unfortunate, and this is a big lesson for all of us to remember. Basically, when we talk about plagiarism, there are three kinds. The first is direct plagiarism. That means almost word by word copying of the original sentences. That's the first kind. The second is mosaic plagiarism, which means ideas copied without a due acknowledgement. The third kind is the insufficient acknowledgement. It means lack of crediting of the source of the information. In my story told earlier, it was a mistake of insufficient acknowledgement because I thought after I include the source, I'll be fine. But I used word-by-word description of the original author. What my professor told me is that you either have to use quotation mark or you paraphrase the statement. But you cannot directly use word-by-word statement from the original author without using the quotation mark. So that's the lesson I learned almost 40 years ago. Now we see 7 common crimes of plagiarism. First, turn in someone else's work as your own. That's the first. Second, copying works and ideas from someone else's without any due credits. Third, failing to put a quote in quotation marks. Fourth, failing to paraphrase properly from the original source or statement. Fifth, giving incorrect information about the source of the quotation. Sixth, changing the words by copying sentence structure of a source and without giving the credits. Seventh, copy ideas from a source and make them up the majority of your own work without giving due credit. Now, wait for a moment. Check for yourself. Did you do anything of the above? There's no shame or even no problem to say you probably have done before. The important thing is that you have to know this is academic wrongdoing and make sure in the future you will not do them again. Okay. Now, examples. Let's see this example. It's very embarrassing. The dean of a school of pharmacy from a medical school would put his name onto another journal article on Nature and present it as his own work. And more interesting, he would dare to put his name first ahead of 2 other authors. And of course, this was found out, and this dean had to get his punishment. You'll find this, the professor adding his name to the article of a highly readable journal without making any contribution to it. Another example. One Chinese student in a foreign university was accused of having plagiarized his teacher's PPT without proper acknowledgement. Well, in other words, he got a PPT from his professor and made a report or whatever the paper, and then without giving the due credit, acknowledgement, he would present as his own stuff. And this is not allowed, either abroad or in China. So out of nowhere, you could get yourself into big academic trouble. People need to be aware. Unfortunately, in the beginning, he was not so aware, he was not so cautioned about the consequences of citing some other people's work without acknowledging the source. Now, the student learned the lesson. And I will caution students who study overseas, please be cautious. Don't make stupid mistakes. And here is an interesting website. It's called Plagiarism Watch. And it just checked the sources of those frauded articles appear on different journals. And the sources or the authors could be either from China or from other countries. If you do this kind of things, you run a high risk of being caught up. And when you're being caught, you're really going to ruin your academic career, because this is a fundamental academic misconduct. Talking of academic or scientific misconducts, there are other kinds, and we have to beware as a scholar. First is self-plagiarism. That means to recycle or reuse your own work without appropriate disclosure and citations. And the worst of it is multiple submission. And if you submit different journals, you hope to be accepted. What if your article was accepted by all journals and you get yourself into big trouble? Because next time when you submit to this journal, you'll be blackmailed. The second is to get others to work for you. That means to commission or pay others to work for your own work. And thirdly is the impropriety of authorship. That means to claim undeserved authorship without the consensus of the authors, or submitting multiple author papers to journals without the consensus of all named authors. The fourth is falsification of data. That means to manipulate experiments or data to generate preferable outcomes, or fabricating the data set entirely. And the fifth is the failure to support validation of the research. That means failure to provide complete data set materials that are needed to facilitate validation of the research for replication purposes. Wait a minute. Think for yourself. Did you do anything like this? Of course, I would trust you will not do it. But did your students do it? You need to tell the students that if you do anything like this, they run a high risk of being caught up. So instead of taking the easy route, you could get yourself totally trapped. Here is example of the trap. 2 students in Xi'an commissioned a special agency to do research projects for them. Specifically, 2 female students at Xi'an University commissioned someone to do the final year projects for them. And this was finally disclosed, and the students really run the risk of being fired or dismissed from the university, because this is blunt academic misconduct. Okay, having said all of this, you know what plagiarism is. You also know what academic misconducts are.